Hi, I'm here today with my longtime collaborator and good friend Paul Ekman, and I'm Bob Levinson, and we're on the campus of UC Berkeley. It's April 2008, and we are here to mark the 30th anniversary of one of the landmark methodological achievements in psychological science, the development of the facial action coding system. And Paul and I have, over the last 3 or 4 years, gotten together on a number of occasions to talk about his life and his work. And today we're going to focus on this wonderful tool that has really revolutionized our ability to understand the role that the face plays in human emotion and increasingly in the emotions of other species as well. So I'm going to ask Paul a series of questions, and we're going to talk back and forth, and we're going to show some slides, and we hope that those of you who watch this, both those of you who are expert in the face and those of you who are just learning about it for the first time, will find this to be an interesting and informative time. So let's get started. Those of us who like biographies, we like our biographies to be clean and neat, and we like them to have lifelong threads and consistent themes. We like to think that Olivier left the nursery and began to act, and Hank Aaron was hitting stones with sticks when he was a toddler. So how about you in the face? When did you first find that this was something that interested you and was a powerful part of the human apparatus?
As an early adolescent, I was very interested in photography. I shoveled snow to earn the money to buy my camera, and more snow and leaves to be able to get a simple darkroom set up. And I did a lot of portraits of all of my neighbors and developed them and printed them and sold them and bought better equipment. So I would say by the time I was 14, I was already getting very involved in portrait photography. And my mother died at that time, and I then went back through my archives and went through all of the portraits of her, gave copies to all the members of the family and friends. So I was interested in the face really quite early in terms of identity. Of course, all of my work has not been on identity. It's been on the movements of the face, on the expressions, the actions of the face. But those are performed on the identity stage, which poses a problem in terms of being able to recognize whether the same movement is made on a different set of identities, a different stage, a different set of features of permanent wrinkles, etc. By the time I was 18, I was observing from behind a one-way mirror group therapy sessions. And I had already decided I was going to become a psychotherapist, a group therapist, because you could help more people at once than in one-on-one therapy. And watching it through a screen, it seemed very evident to me that the face and the body, both, were conveying information that wasn't in the words.
Now, most people don't get to watch group therapy sessions from behind a screen until they're in their 20s. How in the world did you get to do that when you were 18?
Well, when I was 18, I had finished the University of Chicago.
Oh, that's right, you were a prodigy.
I started at 15.
That's right. Yeah.
And as it turned out, I haven't liked to acknowledge much to my long-dead father because we didn't have a very friendly relationship. But one of his friends was a fellow named Louis Lozier, who was the president of the American Group Therapy Association. And my father told Lozier, I have a son who's interested in this crazy stuff. My father had nothing but disdain for anything in the mental health field.
He was a physician.
He was a pediatrician. And Lozier and I met, and we got along very well, and he said, would you like to watch some sessions? So there it was. It was both the fact that I was further along in my education and a family connection.
Yeah. I thought it might be helpful for the people who might see this interview who have never really studied the face, if I could ask you just to talk a little bit about how the face works, that is just briefly about the nerves that enable the muscles to move, the numbers of muscles, and what it is that those muscles do that create the kinds of things that you can classify and score with facts. In other words, could we have a 2-minute anatomy?
Well, it's sort of a, I didn't want to learn anatomy because learning anatomy, I may as well go to medical school and be my father's prize offspring, and I was certainly not willing to do that. I was forced to deal with anatomy by simply the facts, not the FACS, the FACTS, the facts of what you need to know to measure facial movement, because the movements of the features and the skin, the creation of temporary wrinkles or the deepening of those that are already there, all of facial movement is a result of muscles that originate in, most of them in bony structure, and attach in skin and pull it from one place to another. Of course, I didn't know this when I started.
I found a picture. It's one of my
Oh
favorite
my
ones,
God.
where they've actually dissected your face,
Yes,
and
that?
you can see the muscles. So it might be
And
helpful.
that's on one side of the face, you're seeing what you'd see in any standard anatomy text, which is the dead anatomy. What happens is you take the skin off of a cadaver. On the right side is what we created in FACS, which is a functional anatomy, that once you learn how our annotation system, the circles are at the point of origin, and the end of the line is the point of attachment. So AU10, Action Unit 10, shown in this figure, pulls the upper lip towards that point of origin, producing a movement just like this. That's 10. That's 12. I'm doing it unilaterally.
Show off.
The real show off is, are you ready?
Uh-oh. I like to think of you as the
Olympic
academia's-
champ. The Olympic champ of facial movement. If we only had such an event, we'd win it every year. So there are some facial muscle movements that are where the muscle orbits, like the what we call well, it's called in Latin orbicularis oris, and we extract from that a number of separate strands that independently can move. And this is a really crucial thing because it's easiest to show it in the eyebrows. In the standard anatomy text, still to this day, it shows frontalis as one sheet of muscle that goes up this way. And rarely does it mention what it does. But there has to be independent neural supply to two different strands for me to do what I just did.
Which was you move the inner side and then
the outer side. So that must mean that we've got the ability to activate. We have separate neural supply for these two groups of strands. And the only way you're going to learn that is by a functional anatomy, which is what we did. And we didn't want to do it, but we were forced to do it in order to account for facial movement. And there are two different cranial nerves that are responsible for, one of them is responsible for almost everything we see, and another comes in on some of the lid movements. And those are what's producing these changes, typically bilaterally, but sometimes unilaterally. Usually not equally strong on both sides of the face, especially if it's deliberate. The more spontaneous it is, the more likely it's going to be symmetrical or approach symmetry. There's probably never perfect symmetry if you're, but from a visual point of view, that's what we see.
And just to talk about the sort of the functional or observable anatomy, so we've got things that move,
Yes.
and then we have things that kind of pouch and thicken.
Yes.
And,
Well, when you pull up a muscle like that,
Yeah.
you're creating pouches, or we named this the Oster pouch because she pointed out how this little spot here is critical for distinguishing the difference between the pouch of 10 and of 12.
this is for Harriet Oster?
For Harriet Oster, who was one of the original FACS learners.
Yeah.
So you'll get wrinkles. Now, I think I have, I've learned how to shave without looking at my face as a totality, but I think I have pretty permanent nasolabial fold wrinkles. You're beginning to get them, Robert. But you can change the direction of them and the depth of them by the action. The same way I have some permanent horizontal wrinkles. I don't know whether I've got any verticals yet. I hope I don't. But they deepen with the action of frontalis, and they deepen in different areas of the forehead. So you're going to produce furrows or wrinkles, or deepen ones, or change the shape of them. You're going to gather skin and produce bulges, bagging. It really also depends on how elastic that skin is. You don't see a lot of wrinkling in the neonate's face, but as we age, if we don't use sunblock as we're supposed to, we get less elasticity and more wrinkling.
And for those people who really don't know facts, it is the looking at those things and then determining what it was that the muscles were doing that caused those things to occur, which is the genius of the system.
What we really wanted to be able to do is to describe anything a human being could do. So we'd be able to answer two questions. Have you made the same exact expression twice? How can you know that unless you can describe it precisely? And if it isn't the same, how does it differ? And second, has person A and person B made exactly the same movement? And the only way you can answer that is to know whether or not the same muscles fire, because their noses aren't going to be shaped the same way, nor will their lips, or they may well differ if they're 40 years difference in age, or even 20 or even 10, they may differ in fatty deposits and permanent wrinkling. But then we also wanted to find out, this is a more specific issue, which facial expressions, if I can use a loose metaphor, are synonyms. You know, we can catalog and have cataloged over 100 different members of the angry family of expressions. Some of them are associated with different variations in anger, some with intensity, like annoyance versus rage, some with the difference between, for example, vengeance or vengefulness and indignation. Those are members emotionally of the same family, and there are variations, but are there synonyms? Are there recognizably different appearances of the face that are tied to exactly the same state? And the only way you can know that is for your measurement system to be as precise as possible, hopefully more precise than the meaning system. Yeah. Then you'll know what you can collapse. What are the things that are in some sense equivalent? You can't start out with that. That's your endpoint. Yeah.
Over the years, you've been very generous in your writings and the talks in terms of crediting those who influenced your work. And you've already mentioned Sylvan Tompkins. And I think you've said before that there were really three major intellectual influences, Duchenne, Darwin, and Tompkins. And you can add any you want to that list.
David Ephron in terms of body movement.
Yeah, and you introduced me to his book, his dissertation, maybe, so I don't have a picture of him, but I thought maybe, again, to sort of close off this kind of background part of this interview, we could just quickly talk about each of these people and the influences that they had. So the first one would be Darwin.
Well, of course, I knew about Darwin's views, but until I got my first evidence from the literate culture study that Sylvan might be right, I never read Darwin's expression book.
Really?
Yeah. So I then went and read it. This must have been 1967 when I had the evidence. Before I went to New Guinea, I read it. But I already had the literate culture data. And brilliant book. I mean, I certainly would consider myself a Darwinian. I still think, and that if someone says to me, I can only read one book about facial expression, even though I have so far published 14, I would say read Darwin's Expression of Emotion in Man and Animals. I hope you would read the third edition that I edited, because it has commentaries, many of which you contributed, from a modern point of view on what Darwin had to say. But he was on the money, both about expression and about the emotions being expressed. And on the fundamental issue, as to how is emotional life organized. Are there really discrete modules of emotion like anger, fear, or are these just names we give to things that vary in the amount of pleasantness or unpleasantness? And of course, all the new work in neuroscience has provided, I thought we already had decisive evidence, but this is totally unavoidable, that the discrete or modular approach, which we can really, its first instantiation in science is by Darwin in that book. And I don't believe Wundt is the founder of psychology. I think Darwin in that book is the first scientific work on the field of psychology, focused, of course, on emotion and expression and on gesture. There's quite a bit on gesture. But his evidence wasn't very good. It could be dismissed because he gave people the answer. He'd say, when he would write to various people around the world, Darwin was an unbelievable correspondent and saved every letter he got, and every letter he wrote his wife copied before he mailed it, so the whole stuff, it's all there. You can get it in the Cambridge University Library, which I went through. But he would say, have you observed that when the eyebrows are up and the jaws drop, that people are surprised? What he should have done is said, when the eyebrows are up and the jaws drop, when you've observed that, what were the circumstances? So he gave people the answer, so the fact that they gave him back what he wanted to hear, we can just throw out. The evidence was worthless, but he had the answers. Yeah. He had most of the answers. The only thing he left for me completely were two things. One is deception. There are only 2 sentences on deception. And the other is the work that we did together, which he had no inkling of, that making the movement on your face can generate changes in your physiology. Yeah. Those are the only 2 things about emotion that I see no trace of in Darwin's book, which I've read innumerable times.
Yeah, and it's really now, again, with contemporary neuroscience and the idea of the mirror neuron system, that this idea that, you know, you can initiate an emotion with a facial movement, and the importance of that for contagion of emotions across conspecifics really comes into prominence with some sort of a fundamental neural basis. So
yes,
it's interesting the way.
Although my argument, and I just made this argument at a neuroscience meeting in Portugal last month, is that our joint work on Mobius syndrome shows, I think, reasonably well, that it's a central activity. You don't really need to have a working face to have an emotion.
Right, right.
Now, having a working face means that the emotion you have is going to influence those who see you, but it isn't necessary
for the internal experience.
For the internal experience.
Yeah.
And in that way, I differ from Izzard and from, what's the name of the other psychologist who's pushed that line, the facial feedback line? Had people hold pencils in their mouth.
You're probably thinking of one of the theorists.
Yeah, I can't remember his name. But in any case, that has to be, it's not because he isn't an interesting and nice guy, it's because I'm 74.
Yeah, so. Okay. And this was an interesting thing, was actually I think it was 10 years, because, let's see, expression of emotion in man and animal is 72, and in 62, Duchenne publishes his book, which is, this is a very bad translation, Mechanisms of Human Physiology and Analysis, Electrophysiological Analysis of the Expression of the Emotions.
Now, Duchenne is just amazing. He was a contemporary of Charcot, who forced him out of Paris. They were very competitive. Duchenne taught at the Beaux-Arts. He taught artists and sculptors to stop doing things that were anatomically impossible. All of his original photographs are at the Beaux-Arts. He gave it to them because nobody else wanted it. There is a Duchenne Institute, but it's 30 miles outside of Paris. And the Parisians, to this day, really ignore him. I love to say when I'm in France that if you want to read Duchenne's classic, important book published in 1862, it's been out of print in France since 1865, but there's English editions available. That are.
And Darwin was very aware of him.
Darwin was very aware. Darwin used a number of Duchenne's photographs. There's a lovely piece of correspondence in which Darwin says to Duchenne, "What shall I pay you for the use of these photographs in my expression book?" And Duchenne says, "Between men of science, there should be no commercial transactions." Think of that today. I learned about Duchenne through Darwin's book, and Harriet Oster, fortunately, had been a undergraduate major in French, so she was very fluent in French. I went to the rare books room at UCSF, and we had one of 6 complete copies of Duchenne's book. And Harriet read it and translated the critical passages. Now, Duchenne had some things wrong, but he had 90% of it right. He looked at almost all of the combinations of 2 muscles, but not all of them, and some of 3, but only a small portion, and some of 4. But even, his most brilliant substantive contribution was to say that it is orbicularis oculi, that its absence, that's the muscle that orbits the eye, its absence unmasks the false friend because it does not obey the will. So he's really telling us in specific, if you want to tell the difference between an enjoyment smile and the polite or false smile, look for the presence of orbicularis oculi. What he got wrong is that there are 2 independent strands. We labeled one of them AU6, which very few people can do. So I even cannot do it bilaterally, voluntarily. And AU7, everybody can do it. It's totally irrelevant. So it's only one part. What he also left out is the crucial clue, and this actually isn't in FACS. I wish if there was going to be a 3rd edition, I'd put it in. But everyone who wants to do this measurement of the Duchenne smile, that is, I've named the enjoyment smile.
Which by the way, I thought was extremely gracious of you, because it really resurrected his memory in science, because I think no one had heard of him.
Yes, well, that's good. He should be resurrected. Yeah. I hope someone will resurrect me 100 years from now. So when you do a really broad AU12, it's like